Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. There's been a lot of talk lately about Nate Diaz and when he might fight again, and also who is his next opponent going to be. And I figured right now would be the perfect time to make a video about the entire Nate Diaz UFC situation, because Nate Diaz tweeted out today talking about the UFC and also talking about a potential Conor McGregor trilogy. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to make a video because I wanted to talk about the real reason I believe that Nate Diaz does not have a fight booked yet in the UFC. And there's just so many things that I feel like not a lot of people are talking about, or people don't even remember from years ago. And I'm sure there's plenty of fans who follow the sport now but didn't follow it 5-6 years ago to know all the history between the UFC and Nate Diaz. And that's why I'm kind of going to briefly go over it before I answer the question of why I believe that Nate Diaz does not have a fight book. So first off, if you go all the way back to about 2014, 2015, somewhere around there, Nate Diaz and the UFC were having contract disputes. And Dana White came out in the public eye talking to the media. I think it was at one of his scrums. And he said Nate Diaz is not a needle mover. And for those of you who don't really understand what that means, he was essentially saying nobody cares about Nate Diaz, or Nate Diaz isn't popular. And Nate Diaz, people cared about him then. He was nowhere near the level of star he is now. But Dana White was just using that basically just to kind of do the opposite of his job, which is to promote his fighters. And eventually, I guess Nate Diaz and Dana White and the UFC figured it out. And eventually came back and he fought Michael Johnson back in December of 2015 after sitting out for a year. And he went out there and looked super impressive against Michael Johnson. He defeated Michael Johnson, and that's when he gave his famous, call out of Conor McGregor after the fact. At this point in time, that fight was not even thought of because Conor was the interim featherweight champion at the time. I think he just beat Chad Mendes, and he was getting ready to fight Jose Aldo like very soon. And, that fight made absolutely no sense. And little did we know that was actually going to be his next fight, because Conor McGregor won the belt off Jose Aldo, then decided to move up to 155. He challenged RDA for the belt, but RDA had to pull out for an injury. And guess who decided? The UFC decided to have step in Nate Diaz. He comes in, Nate Diaz, and don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people say, oh, Conor McGregor made Nate Diaz. People cared about Nate Diaz before this fight. But the upset win over Conor McGregor at UFC 196 was a moment in Nate Diaz's career that really truly propelled him into the star that he is today. I mean, not a lot of people expected him to beat Conor McGregor at 196. I actually picked Nate Diaz in that fight. I wish I had a YouTube channel, but it propelled him into being a massive star. And even right after that, I knew the UFC, and a lot of people knew the UFC was going to book that rematch. And there was even some contract negotiating issues for that. And finally, that came together. He fought Conor McGregor again in August of that very same year, 2016, lost via majority decision in a very close fight. And then Nate Diaz sat out for 3 years until he finally fought Anthony Pettis. He beat Anthony Pettis in August 2019. And then he fought Jorge Masvidal at UFC 244, November of 2019. He lost that fight via doctor stoppage. And then he sat out again for almost 2 years. And that's where we get to his most recent fight at UFC 263 against Leon Edwards. And, he lost that fight. He was dominated for the majority of the fight. But Nate Diaz landed that, nasty right hand at the tail end of the fight, hurt Leon Edwards. And that's all people care about. And I'll tell you guys this much, and most of you know this already. Nate Diaz can lose a bunch of fights in a row, and nobody's going to care. People tune in to watch Nate Diaz. And the reason, it's been now almost a year, it's been June 12th, 2021, so it's coming up on a year since Nate Diaz has been booked for a fight, since his fight against Leon Edwards. And Nate Diaz has been super vocal about wanting a fight. He's been talking about fighting Dustin Poirier nonstop since early 2022. And I believe the real reason that the UFC has not booked him a fight, I mean, first off, there's been the constant contract negotiations throughout the course of his career. And right now, I feel like a lot of people forget this, Nate Diaz is trying to fight out his UFC contract, and the UFC and Dana White absolutely hate when fighters do this. What the UFC does to a lot of these guys is they sign them to 6, 7 fight deals. And with these deals, there's really no downside to the UFC because you lock them in for a long period of time. And at any point in that contract, the UFC can cut you coming off a loss. If you lose a fight, it doesn't matter if they just signed you to a 10-fight deal, they can cut you. And the UFC hates when fighters try to fight out these contracts. And usually what happens with a guy like Nate Diaz, they'll get down to 2, 3 fights, maybe, very rarely does the UFC let guys to get 1 fight left on their contract. 2 fights, 3 fights, the UFC will re-sign them or work to re-sign them because they don't want them going out to free agency and trying to test their value. And even so, I mean, this is a whole nother topic for another video, but the restrictiveness of the UFC contracts. I mean, even if you do fight out your deal, the UFC has exclusive negotiating rights, which means you can't talk to anybody for a certain period of time after you fight out your contract. And then even after that, if you do sign a new deal with another organization, the UFC can match that deal and keep you regardless of what you want. But that's a topic for a whole nother video. They hate when fighters, especially fighters who are stars like Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is one of the very few stars for the UFC. They hate when these guys fight out their contracts. Look, Dana White clearly has a problem with Francis Ngannou. He fought out his deal. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to use this as leverage for against Nate Diaz. And I believe what's going on is the UFC, and you hear Dana White say this all the time, we're contractually obligated to offer these guys 3 fights a year, which he's saying we have to offer them fights, and whether or not they accept them, blah, blah, blah. But what the UFC does, and I have an example of this with the Nate Diaz situation, is when a fighter fights out their deal or tries to fight out their deal, they'll kind of be vindictive matchmaking. And so what the UFC will do is they'll offer a fight. And I believe, and we pretty much know this to be true, the UFC offered Nate Diaz Khamzat Chimaev. And we know what that is. That's vindictive matchmaking. And Nate Diaz probably turned that down, or definitely turned that down if it was actually offered. And then they extend the contract for a certain period of time. I don't know. I think each contract's different. But let's say he turns down that fight. Then they extend his contract now for longer. Not more fights, but a longer period of time before they have to offer him other fights. And I think the UFC is just trying to play a game with Nate Diaz to either re-sign him at a lesser value than they actually want to pay him, or they're just stalling. They don't want him to fight Dustin Poirier. They don't want him to fight some of these other guys. If he's going to fight out that contract, Dana White and the UFC want that Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor trilogy. That is one of the biggest fights they can make. I know it'll always be there, but now, they fought for the second time in 2016. How much longer are they going to wait? It's been 6 years almost, coming up on 6 years since that second fight. And I think the UFC, I think they do want to re-sign Nate Diaz, but I don't think they want to pay Nate Diaz what Nate Diaz wants. And I think if he's going to fight out his contract, they're probably going to want that Conor McGregor fight. I don't know, though. I'm kind of torn on this because, he'll make a lot of money with the Conor McGregor fight if he gets pay-per-view points and all that stuff. But I think if they're going to let him fight out his contract, it's going to be the Conor McGregor trilogy. But I believe they're just kind of biding their time. That's the fight they want for Conor. That's the fight that I think the UFC says, you know what? This will be the biggest fight for Conor we can make and the most manageable opponent we can make. I mean, the lightweight division is filled with nothing but killers. And I think that the UFC says, you know what? That Nate Diaz fight, it's time for that. It's time for that trilogy. Conor's coming back off that leg break, and we can match him up with Nate Diaz. They want to keep him locked down. They probably want to sign him to another deal. They probably don't want to pay him anywhere near as much money as he's asking for, which is crazy because Nate Diaz is one of the few guys that you throw on a pay-per-view and he increases the value of the pay-per-view buys, the number of pay-per-view buys for that pay-per-view. And I think it just sucks because I really want to see Nate Diaz back in action. Speaking of all that, also, I wanted to mention the tweet that Nate Diaz tweeted out. He tweeted, "I've been trying to fight everyone and no go. What's that? Hold up, UFC. I'm not fighting Conor. He sucks. I'll fight someone. Quit slow rolling me, please." Because Conor's not going to return until probably the fall of this year. And Nate Diaz has been trying to fight since January because Nate Diaz wants to fight out this contract. He does not want to re-sign with the UFC. He wants to test his market value. And I believe that Nate Diaz, if he is able to successfully fight out this contract, then, I mean, Bellator, PFL, ONE, Rising. I think every MMA promotion that could afford it would look into signing Nate Diaz. And that's another reason the UFC tried to book the Khamzat Chimaev fight, because they all know stylistically that's a nightmare matchup for Nate Diaz. And Nate Diaz is most likely going to lose that fight and get destroyed. And they wanted to use that as leverage. One, they wanted to use that to devalue him a little bit for potential other organizations. Oh, well, he just got destroyed by whoever in the UFC. So that's why they tried that vindictive matchmaking. But also for themselves, in the negotiating room, they could say, oh, well, you just lost and you just got dominated by this guy who wasn't even ranked in the top 10 at the time. That's the stuff that the UFC and Dana White would try to do. So it's just a really disappointing situation. I think Nate Diaz will 100% take the Conor McGregor fight, even though he's saying, I'm not fighting Conor, he sucks. He's kind of trolling a little bit there because he knows that is a big money fight. But for me, a Nate Diaz that wants to stay active is what I would love to see from the UFC. And it's just disappointing that we have all this stuff going on. The UFC isn't willing to kind of work this out and figure it out. And I know it's on both parties to kind of figure it out, but it's just disappointing. I would love to see an active Nate Diaz. I mean, could you guys imagine a Nate Diaz that we got to see maybe fight 3 times in a year? And, guys, I hate to say it, Nate Diaz will sit out. He only fought once in 2014 and once in 2015. He sat out 3 years between 2016 and 2019. And then since 2019, he fought twice in 2019. He sat out almost 2 years from then, and now it's coming up on a year since his last fight. Nate Diaz will sit out. He will use every ounce of leverage that he has on the UFC to try to get whatever he wants. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but we could see potentially one more fight from Nate Diaz in the UFC. Then we could see him go on to another organization. I think that's very possible. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.